73 hours. That's how long it's been since I've heard from my dad. He was supposed to contact me more than a day ago. Being an adrenaline junkie and big-time explorer, he thought it was a good idea to go to Nevada to check out a giant hole in the ground known as Devil's Hole. Smart, right? To make matters worse, he went exploring by himself. I was supposed to get a phone call from him every night, but his cell phone goes straight to voicemail when I try to call. After about 12 hours of not hearing from him, I decided to call the police for help. I let so much time go by because I figured he didn't have service. He isn't the type of person to not call and check in. When I told the police where he was, they didn't believe me at first. I begged them to go and check, but they said that they were limited to what they could do. How does that make any sense? After about 24 hours of waiting, I called again. Turned out, they contacted the police in Nevada, and they did go to the site and found traces of someone being there. But it didn't look like they went down into the hole, and there was no trace of anyone leaving either. I did what any concerned individual would do when panicking. I looked up Devil's Hole on the internet. I honestly only knew that it was in Nevada. That's it. Digging deeper, I realized that the hole was so deep that there wasn't an exact measurement of how deep it actually was. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a flight to Nevada. I have to find him. Something is definitely wrong. The trip dragged on forever. As soon as the plane landed, I ran off to find a ride to the area where my dad was supposed to be. When I made it there, I quickly realized that getting close to the hole was almost impossible. I searched the surrounding area, hoping to find some trace of my dad. That's when I heard it, coming from the depths of the great pit. "Hello," the voice echoed. It sounded like my dad. "Dad? Can you hear me?" I called. "Yes, I can hear you." His voice rang out. "Are you hurt?" I replied. Silence. "Dad?" I called out again. I could hear faint shuffling of feet within the hole, almost as if he were pacing back and forth. "Get me out of here," he yelled. "I'm gonna go get help," I yelled back. No, you can do it yourself," he answered. In any other circumstance, I would have found that to be weird. Maybe he didn't want us to get into any trouble. I agreed not to go. "Just climb down in. It's not that deep." Something didn't seem right. But he's my dad, and I have to help him. I started to climb down toward the hole. The shuffling became louder and more frantic. "Are you okay?" I asked nervously. "Yes. You're almost there."
"I can see you,"
he answered. "How can you—" Before I could finish, I tripped on a rock and fell toward the hole. That's when I felt something grab me by the leg, and I fell into the abyss. When I came to, I realized that I was lying on a giant rock. The cavern wasn't well lit, but I could make out my surroundings. I looked all around the area to see if there was any sign of my dad. That's when I saw him, lying on the floor. I looked up to see how far I fell. To my surprise, the fall should have killed me. "How am I still alive?" I whispered. And I wasn't injured either. I dragged myself up and made my way over to where my dad lay. "Dad, wake up!" I shook his limp body. He looked and felt extremely weak. He stirred and looked at me with sunken eyes. "You shouldn't have come," he said fearfully. "Now he will eat us both." I stared at him, shocked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's been trapped in here for a very long time," he trailed off. "We have to get out of here," I exclaimed. "There's no escape," my dad responded. I couldn't believe that he was just giving up. And he's talking crazy about something that's going to eat us. "Enough," I said. "We are getting out of here now." I tried to move him, but he was too weak to stand. "Come on," I pleaded. "Stand up." "I can't move," he said weakly. Then the ground began to shake, and I could hear the shuffle of footsteps echoing in the distance. "He's coming," my dad whispered. "You have to hide." I looked around frantically for a place to hide. In the far corner, there was a small spot for me to slip through unseen. I crept over to the spot and adjusted to the tiny area. As I turned, a large, misshapen figure lumbered into the room.
Where is it?
The monster asked, looking down at my dad. He slowly looked up at the hideous beast. "I am the last one you will trick into this hole," my dad said weakly. "I will make sure you will never leave." The monster swayed back and forth, irritated by the answer.
"There's no reason keeping you around,"
it said angrily. The monster grabbed my dad by the leg and dragged him out of the room. I could hear his screams of pain and agony. There was nothing that I could do. I have to try to escape. When I stepped from my hiding spot, I felt some resistance and a snap under my shoe. I looked down and quickly realized that I had just stepped on what looked to be remains. The monster has been luring people into the hole and eating them. "We aren't the first ones here," I whispered to myself. I stepped over the rest of the remains and looked for a way to climb up the side of the cavern wall. There was a piece that stuck out, but I wasn't tall enough to jump and grab it. Exploring was probably the worst idea, but I had to find a way out, and climbing up wasn't going to work. I slid against the wall, out of the room, and into a dark tunnel. I could hear the echo of the monster's footsteps off in the distance. As I crept along the wall, I could feel a hard crunching. under my shoes. I could only imagine what that was. I found a ledge that was more of my height, and it seemed like it traveled back toward the room. Maybe this will help me climb out, I thought to myself. I climbed up onto the ledge and made my way back toward the giant room. Thankfully, it worked. In fact, it connected to the high piece in the wall I had trouble reaching before. I reached and climbed the side of the cold stone wall, panic and desperation swelling within me. As I climbed higher and higher, I could feel a draft of fresh air from the outside world. I'm almost there, I said to myself. Just a little more. My strength began to fade, and my hands and arms were starting to become numb from the stress. When I was within arm's reach of my escape route, I turned and looked down. What possessed me to do such a ridiculous thing is beyond me. Satisfied with my final search of the cavern, I reached for the opening. I felt a soft, yet forced, strange-smelling gust on the back of my neck. That's when I heard.
There you are.